Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if Pluto is transiting your natal fifth house. And I actually made this video and I think I did it twice and then I erased one of them and both of them are erased. Maybe I just did it once and I thought I did it twice. Who knows? But I thought that was very strange that this video got erased because Pluto is strange in and of itself in a certain way. It has a formidable kind of vibe to it. So, anyway, I want to give a shout out to cafeastrology.com. When I do certain types of videos, I consult online sources just to kind of give me a basis for talking points so that I feel like I'm saying things that are correct. I don't always do that with astrological videos, consult other sources. But when I do these types, I do for the transits in particular because I want to make sure that I'm saying stuff that's true. But I'm always putting it in my own words. And so don't judge Cafe Astrology because of what I say, because I'm interpreting it in my own way. And so Pluto is a generational planet. It's not always going to have the same transit. So, for instance, in Capricorn, you could probably say that when you include the retrogrades that have occurred, where the transiting planet loses degrees because Pluto is such a slow-moving planet. Um, when it loses degrees and then gains degrees, it takes such a long time to get back up to speed. So it lingers in a particular sign. And with Capricorn, I think we could say it's about a 16-year transit, including the retrogrades, the last two retrogrades into back um, in Capricorn. And when it's in Aquarius, it will be probably like over 20 years that it will be in Aquarius. So that is an example of how long this planet can linger in one sign. Now, another thing to consider with your chart is that you may have, if you're doing the unequal house system, you can very easily have more than one sign in a house. So it may go a lot quicker in a particular house if you only have a little bit of the sign that Pluto is in that house. So it's going to differ from person to person, and also depending on what house system you're using. And so you'll have to consult your personal chart to see exactly how long it's going to be here and when it's actually going to enter that house, the fifth house, as we are talking about. Well, what is the fifth house in astrology? This is the house that is ruled by Leo in astrology. Now, what rules your fifth house is going to be, depend on you. But in astrology, the fifth house belongs to Leo, and Leo's ruler is the sun. So some of the big themes about the fifth house are love. Now, love is a very broad concept, right? It doesn't mean current, the person you're currently with. It could be somebody that you fell in love with 10 years ago that you've been pining over ever since. And so it's love, very broad, and it's about creativity. It's about children, and it's also about conceiving children. So for somebody who is wanting to start a family, um, the conception of children, if you have certain transits in the fifth house, this can assist in that, or it might even block it to some degree. And there might be a particular cosmic reason why this is happening for you. But anyway, the other things that the fifth house can be about are your inner child. We all have our inner child that is this innocent being, and that is very playful, spontaneous, creative, everything that you think about with children, the innocence of children, all of that, we all possess that within ourselves. But for some people, if, look at the planets that are in your fifth house. If you have certain planets in the fifth house, like for instance, I have Pluto in the fifth house. And it just dawned on me because I always thought it was a weird planet to have in the fifth house. But one of the things that Pluto in the fifth, I believe, can be about is that the child sees things, or they experience things that maybe kind of are unwholesome, and that kind of threatens to um, keep them from having that innocence of childhood, or threatens to destroy that, because something, or it could even be like with power and control. Sex is associated with Pluto as well. And the fifth house can be one of the sexual houses in the form of sex as for pleasure's sake, which is a a reason that people have sex, which sounds stupid, right? But with religion, with organized religion, they introduced the concept of, that sex was for procreation, right? But we know that there is more to that story, that people are not just having sex for procreation. But what pisses me off is that, why is the house of sex for pleasure the same house as procreation? Because it seems to contradict it. I wish procreation was the eighth house, but what can I do? Who can I, speak to the manager about? But in any case, yeah, so I was talking about my natal Pluto. We're talking about transiting Pluto here, so I don't want to confuse anything. I was just giving an example in my own chart. But you can see if you have any planets in that fifth house, like Saturn. If you have Saturn in your natal fifth house, you may have been somebody who had your childhood cut short because something happened that required you to kind of become like a little adult, or just, it could be just like the parentified child in general. But usually I think of the parentified child as somebody who has to go to work at an early age and helps support the family. But it doesn't always have to be. It can be on the psychological level, I suppose. So anyway, I'm just, saying that if you have natal planets in the fifth house, Pluto will cross over these planets, the transiting Pluto, and that will have its own effect on their functions as well. So that's another thing to consider. And so what else? And I think, I don't know if I said this, but Pluto is the business that you own. I mean, the fifth house is the business that you own. So to me, that's like a form of creativity. So it's like you're creating this entity, and maybe you even have a business where you're exercising creativity. You're, sewing tote bags or something. And so it could be a double situation like that with double creativity. So yeah, that just gives a little flavor to the fifth house. And so Pluto is the planet that is one of the planets that rules the sign of Scorpio, and therefore the eighth house in astrology, along with Mars. And both Mars and Pluto we could call heavies in terms of planets in astrology. In Vedic astrology, they call them malefic planets. When you can, if you know Spanish, malo means bad, or malevolent. but malefic meaning that we could say that they're very challenging. I don't I do not say good and bad when it comes to astrology. That's too simplistic. But it could be challenging in certain respects. But the problem is overemphasizing that. Maybe there are some astrologers, especially traditional astrologers, who tended to play up Venus and Jupiter and say, oh, these are so great, and blah, blah, blah. And Pluto, Mars, Saturn, these kinds of planets, oh, they're terrible. They're going to have a bad effect on you. And that is simply untrue. Sometimes a so called benefic planet like Jupiter or Venus can create an indulgent attitude or overindulgence. And Saturn might whip you into shape, might make you more disciplined to go after goals. So it's very important not to uh, be that simplistic and think and also binary, black and white kind of thinking. So anyway, let's talk about this transit of Pluto in the fifth house. One of the key words of Pluto is transformation. Now, because it's a slow-moving planet, it's not something that, like the personal planets, they zip in and out of a house typically, except if, they're retrograding and they may hang around for a while. But they typically go in, they go out, they may have an influence, but it may not be so long lasting. On the other hand, these generational planets like Neptune and Pluto in particular, but even Uranus it might be half that type of transit, but it still is like 7 years or, I don't know, around that time. That's a long time too. And that can shape a person's attitude and behavior. So when Pluto goes through the fifth house, it may have a gradual effect, but it could have a very profound effect. And that's one of the words I would associate with Pluto. Just like Scorpio, we would say intensity. So intensifying the affairs of this particular house, but also creating profundity, which means depth. And because Pluto is one of the rulers of Scorpio, this can be profound when we talk about profundity, like on the emotional level, where the issues of that house are just really felt deeply, or depth, So one of the things about the fifth house, I wouldn't characterize the fifth house as a superficial house. I wouldn't say that about any house, but I mean the behavior of the person here. But it could manifest that way in certain regards, because the fifth house can be like affairs or flings when it comes to love and romance. Okay. And it might, so in other words, love, it might not really be love. It might be more like lust. It might be more like romantic notions. But some people, it's not, totally about lust. Why they get involved with one uh, romantic situation after the other, in my opinion. I think sometimes people are in love with love, and they just it's like they get this high from the infatuation phase when they've met a new person. And it's almost like a chemical reaction when we're in that infatuation stage. If you've ever been truly in love, you know what I'm talking about. And it's not about lust, nothing to do with lust, where you just, you're physically attracted to that person. I'm talking about on the emotional level. And even though this is not a water house, the fifth house, this is a fire house because this is Leo's domain. So it's about passion, but the fire signs are emotional. It's just more about emotional about things rather than their own sob stories. You know what I mean? They're not really. It's more objective. So passionate about love, passionate about ideas, ideals, causes, those kinds of things. That's how the fire signs. It's very expansive, so it takes in a lot. It's the bigger picture kind of a vibe. Um, but anyway, these kinds of people can be very passionate about love. And so when you have planets in the fifth house, it will take on this kind of passionate nature too, like the Leo type of nature. Another big thing about the fifth house I failed to mention is that it has to do with hobbies, leisure activities, your time off, what you do in that time off. And so when we talk about a planet like Pluto, and we could also say if somebody has a transit of Saturn in their fifth house, there's like some similarities with this. And actually, Saturn was in your fifth house a few years ago. Well, actually, up until I'm recording this in November of 2023, up until March of 2023. So for some people, they may have noticed with Saturn going through their fifth house that they were taking love a lot more seriously. And so that if you're already coupled, it's not going to be uh, experienced obviously that way for such people. That would be more like, making sure that the person is giving time to their to love, and they're not just kind of neglecting it, being more conscientious, I would say. But with Pluto, there is this sense of the thing itself. Is this deep enough? And, obviously, depending on the person's astrological makeup, or maybe you could say their karmic makeup too, because that's going to be like, I mean, that could be reflected in the chart too, but I mean, I don't want to make everything about the chart. Just like the person's karma with love or their past experiences with love, they may have certain attitudes that can push it even further. So the person that is, Pluto can be obsessive. And if we kind of like break down why do people get obsessive, that's a very interesting one. Sometimes it's due to extreme interest in something, but sometimes there is, I would call it like an insecurity or like a need to control a situation, including a person. So it is super important when somebody has a transit like Pluto and they already have these tendencies that they transform in the direction of more detachment, more neutrality, because they're already coming from a place of extreme subjectivity. Yeah, and that's another thing about obsession is that the person, people who are obsessed about something, they're really injecting themselves into that situation. And instead of even seeing the other person's point of view, and it becomes all about them. Yes, it's very self absorbed, but it's also very narrow in scope. It's not really, if you've ever talked to somebody who's obsessed about something, they can't talk about anything else. And they can't listen to you because they're so wrapped up in their own obsession. If you're a person who has been kind of skating the surface of what love means, maybe you have been somebody who has been um, very flirtatious and just kind of treating love as a game. I would say, like Mars in the fifth house, for instance. This can indicate deepening your attitude towards love. And one thing that Cafe Astrology says, which I think is very interesting, there are a couple of things I noted that I would have never been able to talk about on my own. Um, One of them is that when Pluto first goes into that house, that the shadow side can come out because and this is that's another thing that Pluto represents is the shadow. And the shadow is basically that part of each of us that is rejected by the self. And when I say each of us, people who are not really addressing themselves at a deep level. And this is going to be a lot of people on this planet that are like that. Um, I have come to realize on my own because I always thought it was such a weird term, like shadow work. It's a new agey kind of a term. Maybe kind of I know in the pagan community they have the Book of Shadows. I don't exactly know what that means, but I'm assuming it's like kind of a maybe it's like a journal, kind of talking about the person's deep dark secrets, but I could be totally wrong about that. I'll have to probably shouldn't have mentioned that, but yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things I thought was kind of strange. But I realized that psychotherapy is actually shadow work. That's what psychotherapy is, but it has to be the kind of psychotherapy that we traditionally had, that is talk therapy, that is going into the depths of things, but also putting it back on the person, not just kind of going into the past, but also saying, okay, what is your role in this? And I don't know how therapy works today, if they even go that in depth, and if they really are trying to, make people, think that they hold the key to this, because I'm sure that there are, there's different types of therapy, so I'm sure there's always going to be that. And, Carl Jung actually used the astrological chart for his patients or clients, whatever you want to call them. And I think I don't know if he kind of popularized the idea of the shadow self or anything, these archetypal patterns, but because I don't know a lot about him. But anyway, I just thought that was really interesting. So basically, I can understand why this would come out at the beginning of the transit, because it's setting the stage. It's like the theme of what's going to occur here. So it might be an event that occurs for you. So look at when it's going to enter, if it already has entered your fifth house, or if it's going to enter a year from now. You'll have to see exactly what degree your fifth house is to be able to understand this. And then you'll be able to track that. The reason that Pluto is transforming us is because there has to be improvements made. There's a reformation that is associated with Pluto that we can call transformation. Um, and that, when we use the term reformation, it's almost like directed towards the world at large, or things that are not personal, but it has the same basic meaning and effects, where it's like alchemy, that's eighth house, and we could call that Pluto too, is the idea of turning something that is of an inferior quality into something that is much richer and ultimately better for us. And in the eighth house that Scorpio, Pluto, and Mars rule, the issue of death I would associate with Pluto because it really is the ultimate form of transformation, but also rebirth. You know, it's not just one. As a matter of fact, I have a deck of tarot cards, and they say, you know, the death card 13, number 13, is the death card, but also on this deck I have, it says rebirth as well, because they don't want people focused on one without the other. So this is something that you can see the phoenix rising from the ashes. So in the fifth house, um, if a person has been hurt in their life, maybe multiple times, by those who claim to love them, they may have a negative. Uh, Love may have be a four-letter word to them that's not so very good. And this can transform that. You might meet your soulmate, and you might finally learn why people are always going on and on about love, because that might be the first person that you can truly say you feel loves you, and that transforms your experience of love. But it's never that the other person is doing that. They are the catalyst for you to be able to change your ways of being. But we're not saying that Prince Charming or Princess Charming is coming along and they're going to just make everything all better. They're the catalyst. You embrace it. And some people, you can have a transit go through your house, and if you are afraid, just like I said about when it first comes into that house, if something comes up that brings up fear and you just turn away from it, you might just reject it out of hand. And that means, and you have free will. So it's not going to be that if somebody is given the gift of transformation that they're necessarily going to take it. So this transformation can be also with creativity. So an example, when I was talking about superficiality or, kind of being on the surface, if somebody is an artist and maybe they've done things like nice little landscapes and it's all sweetness and light, and then they start to really change their artistic vision, maybe they're having a spiritual awakening as well, and that is influencing the type of things that they're creating. They may do something that's even darker, that deals with death instead of just all lightness and sweetness and light. And so it could be, rather than, like, I'm thinking of like Monet and the springtime and all of that, maybe it's the autumn or the winter and there's more um, barrenness instead of lushness. There's more decay. I think Pluto can be about decay and things of that nature. And maybe even just completely different types of imagery that's more macabre and less pleasant, but it symbolizes something. I think about the Day of the Dead and La Catrina, the female skeleton that is dolled up. If you've ever seen that Mexican during the Halloween period, and they have her dressed in finery, but she's a skeleton, and it's kind of spoofing this idea of materialism, I would think, and like you can't take it with you, and showing the kind of limited time span that people can enjoy the material, um, Another possibility is that you can create works of art that are deeply felt by others, that have a profound effect, and maybe even have a transformational effect on them. And I'm sure all of us remember movies, music, novels that moved us at the deepest level. And, we can cite those sometimes as even being major shifts in our way of thinking and feeling about different things in life. I believe that the fifth house is a person's firstborn child. So this is just me saying this on my own. I wonder if Pluto here could indicate that the experience is completely transformational. It could be just in general that you change, like you shift your perspective. You might be one of those people who say, I'll never have children, and then you do. But I'm also wondering if you could have a child that has a profound effect on your life, just because it is your firstborn child. Um, this is, if you have your natal Pluto in the fifth house, your firstborn child, you could have a power struggle with them. So maybe that's another possibility too, where you have some sort of power struggles with a child, or your children in general, or you encounter relationships with I shouldn't use the word relationship because that's more of the seventh house, but you encounter people that this is like more of like the dating scene and things like that, that have that controlling quality about them, and maybe you are pushing back as well. But that's an important point to make too, that Cafe Astrology made, was that if you're not owning this energy that the transit brings, which is about the shadow emotions within ourselves, it could be um, brought to you like a mirror image from the people that you meet. And so this is, I was going to say, hey, Scorpios, hey, Taurians, I'm talking to you, but it's really, it can be any sign because we're a mixture. If you have a tendency to be jealous, for instance, that's part of the shadow side of love. Why are people jealous? They're jealous because they're afraid that somebody else, that they're going to be abandoned, that they're going to be betrayed. And actually, betrayal can lead to abandonment, right? So, but also that idea of being less than somebody else. I think that also plays into it. So, being able to face these fears is very important. And I would say, too, speaking of fear, is the fear of intimacy. So Pluto can really be about depth, and that's what depth in love is intimacy. Intimacy, what's the first word that you think of when you think of intimacy? It's probably going to be sex. But intimacy ultimately is about, to me at least, is about emotions, is about the person who is um, able to bare their soul to another person that they're getting deeply involved with, without fear of being shamed, of being uh, betrayed with your trust, of having it thrown back in your face at a later date, which is really about control, about power. So all of those things lead people to kind of hold back. And actually, Scorpio, Pluto, those influences can make a person um, secretive about their emotions, but that's the reason they're doing it, because they're trying to protect themselves. They're trying to stay in control over the situation. So this is about not needing to do that. But if you don't look at those parts of yourself when that comes up for you at the beginning of the transit, you may find that you are attracting people to you that are like scorpionic, but not in a good way, are controlling, are manipulative. And so I would definitely say be careful when you're dating, but this is true for anyone, is to really get to know people that you're dating before getting too involved with them, because you don't want to see their shadow side suddenly come up after you've moved in with them and they've got you under their spell, in other words. Okay, well, I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope that you're looking forward to this transit, or if you're already starting to experience it or have experienced it. If you have experienced you've probably been through many years of this influence. But I hope that it resonated for those people. And if you'd like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.